Good morning and welcome to this edition of the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show. So, everybody's talking about Tulsa, Oklahoma this weekend. There's one person who says he put Tulsa on the map. He says he put Juneteenth on the map. But my guest today, Dr. Kimberly Ellis, says not so fast, Mr. President. You did not put Juneteenth. You did not put Tulsa on the map. She is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. She's a playwright. She is a historian, and she's going to put some things in perspective for us this morning. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Lynne Hayes Freeland. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, so all of a sudden people are talking about Tulsa, which is a good thing, good thing.
Yes, it is. And you're absolutely right that our president did not put Tulsa on the map. The interesting thing is that American history and Americans put Tulsa on the map. And you actually had, what we know of Tulsa and Oklahoma is that before Oklahoma became a state, it was considered Indian territory. And it was really considered a wasteland. It is where the Trail of Tears ended up. And so you had persons who were either enslaved with Native American nations, one of the 5 civilized tribes, so to speak, and or oftentimes they were their partners. They were married and they were enslaved on paper to protect them. And so they also accompanied these Native Americans to what we know as Indian territory, and they built lives. So the irony about the American West in many ways is that it was started by so-called red and black people. It was started by Native Americans and African Americans, and they had an opportunity to create their own form of paradise, if you will. It was meant to be a wasteland. It was meant to be, the idea was that there was really nothing out there, and so send the Indians out there to Indian territory. But what really happened is that they built up towns, they created their own laws, they had their sovereignty, and they built up many beautiful communities, so much so. And there were so many Black towns in what we know of as Kansas and what we now know of as Oklahoma, that Edwin P. McCabe actually wanted to make either one of them an all-Black state. That's how amazing.
Wow.
So when we talk about Tulsa, we need to understand that Tulsa comes from a Creek Indian word, Tulasi, and the name ended up being Tulsa. And so you actually had a lot of so-called Black Indians that were in the Creek Nation in particular. And those African Americans and those Native Americans, they were landowners. Then you had the land rush in Oklahoma. And so there were more landowners. But even before reaching the American West, you had a lot of Black entrepreneurs and persons who were developing Black towns and farms, even in the South. The only reason why, outside of the Trail of Tears, the only reason why African Americans left the South is because of racial terror. Their barns were being burned down. They were getting kicked off their farms. There was what's called a Negro run. And so, unfortunately, a Negro run was caused even in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, most of the other residents that were African American, Native American, they resisted it because when whites came, they came largely from the South. And when they came from the South, they brought their Jim Crow mentality. They brought a mentality of racism. So much so that when Oklahoma became a state, they bragged about instituting Jim Crow segregation and celebrated the fact that even their telephone booths were separated, right? That's not how the Native Americans and the African Americans were living in Indian territory beforehand. So it's another lesson that we really need to understand when we think about so-called Black Indians and our relationship and becoming a state. Oklahoma becoming a state institutionalized the system of white supremacy. You only had, you still had wealth, and then oil was discovered on what was supposedly a wasteland, which is a part of the reason why Oklahoma became a state, is because once oil was discovered, it was like, here comes the land rush. Everybody wanted to make money. And so, yes, you had wealthy people emerge from all ethnicities from the oil boom. So Tulsa was considered an oil boom town. African Americans created a Greenwood residential and business district that we now popularly know as Black Wall Street. But really, it partly comes from Booker T. Washington having visited and encouraged them to create Greenwood, which is partly named after the Greenwood village that was next to Tuskegee. Institute in Alabama, and also Greenwood, Mississippi. So there's that continuum.
Hold that thought. Hold
Okay.
that thought. We gotta get the rest of this story, but we have to take a commercial break. So hold that thought. We'll be right back. I know you're glad you tuned in this morning to the Lynne Hayes Freeland Show. We'll be right back.